We have the FIFA World Cup case study that Drive and Fox Sports, if anybody caught any of the World Cup, especially the studio they had in Red Square in Moscow, some of the crazy graphics that they had done, there was a lot of really unique new things that they did. These guys have been kind enough to join us and present on some of the cool stuff that they did. Nick, why don't you guys take it away, and we'll hopefully have a couple minutes for questions at the end.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us. Today is a very special day. I just want to start out saying that today is Marco's 29th birthday. So thank you. Thank you. We're going to talk about the World Cup, 2018 World Cup on Fox Sports. It's a unique opportunity to work on a project like this. One of the unique qualities of it is we actually worked on it for almost 3 years, so 34 months. And so there's a lot to talk about. I mean, condensing this down into 20 minutes, and we'll try to make it 15 because I know everyone's ready to get out there. It was a difficult task to do that. So we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about the creative process, and how we solved creative problems and created a conceptual platform. And then we're also going to talk about some technical process used creatively to solve technical problems. So, to really do a project well, it takes a partnership with the client. Our partner, at Fox Sports, Mike Dolan is here. They always are really good at creating a creative brief, and so Mike's going to spend a little bit of time here just kind of introducing the creative brief that was created for this project.
So, we kind of dwindled it down to these three things, and being especially American company in Moscow, especially with all the things going on in the world, we needed to be careful on some things. But first and foremost, we want to embrace international scope and flavor of the World Cup. It's the world's biggest sporting event. And then, paying tribute to the environment was really important to us, the history and the culture. But where we needed to be very careful was cliches. We didn't want to show, constructivists. We didn't want to show any kind of Cold War things or war propaganda. We didn't want to get into, onion domes, things that were really, we thought, cliche. And then, of course, it's being aired on our soil. So capturing the American spirit and of course, our Fox Sports attitude, being big and confident and loud, it was kind of the third thing in our brief. So, dwindled it down to sort of three main topics, I guess, for these guys to start from.
So then the question there is, how do you create a conceptual platform that deals with that international scope and scale? How do you pay tribute to the culture that you're broadcasting from, and then how do you have the attitude of the network that you're working with? The other thing about this is this type of tournament every 4 years. It has an Olympic type spirit, an international spirit. It also is a little bit different in the sense that we get more time, it seems like, because in a world where our opens are condensed down to 5 seconds or 3 seconds or at most 10 seconds. So this allows us a little bit more time to be a little bit more epic, and to kind of think of the open and some of the graphics, the bumps, in a little bit different manner. So on to conceptual platform. So getting away from the cliche, onion domes, Russian constructivists, or propaganda, Fox challenged us to look at Byzantine or Russian Orthodox inspiration. And what we saw in that was a sense of the dramatic. We saw ornate and a golden texture. There was this interest that we had in icons and how icons were created, and the gold leaf, the gilding happening on forms and icons and things like that. We noticed a certain repetition, circular repetition that was happening in like the cupolas of some of the Orthodox churches and things like that. There's a very graphic nature to some of the depictions inside those churches. And then that last line there, the folk art, which was more of a modern inspiration that we wanted to take a look at it, but it was something that we thought was kind of interested in semi-related. So those are all the things that we were kind of researching and looking through. This represents some of the initial concepts that we created. This was a long process over a bunch of weeks. I don't know how many. Months. Yeah, too many head injuries. So I don't remember, which is a good thing sometimes. So, but anyways, so this represents some of the frames that we came up with, or frames that represent some of the concepts that we came up with. And we saw some things happening. We started working with team shields and not country flags. We tried to figure out a way to get soccer ball motif into the look. We also were playing around with international color. So these are all things that we were exploring, but they weren't working because they were becoming a little too literal, a little too dark. There wasn't enough international color. There wasn't enough opportunity to kind of have a team-based approach, which is something that's very, very important in sports, of course. So we had that. This is just a graphic that's going to describe how we kind of shifted our focus from that classic and orthodox Byzantine approach, and then we knew we needed something that kind of moved towards the future, had an uplifting, a positive feel to it, and so we had this idea that we needed something to kind of focus on this cross-pollination there. So we realized that if we could come up with something, and we started looking at sports tech. And we realized that if we started combining these two worlds, which have a lot of similarities, we're seeing a lot of interesting patterns and use of materials in sports technology for athletic shoes and uniforms and things like that. And we decided, okay, if we could combine some of those things together, we might have what we need. In addition, we figured that if we could add in this international flavor and move away, this is kind of a study of some of our development. And on the left side, you see the idea of using these team shields, which we realized were not recognizable, at a glance. We really needed to get back into the flag idea, and we created this rivet approach. This also this concentric circle motif is really what became the base of the package. It almost is like looking up into a dome in one of these Orthodox or Byzantine churches. This was the approved concept, so this was a storyboard that got us kind of over the hump. It reflected what we would see in the main open, and it had kind of an international scale and scope. You're seeing the gilded metal or gold. Instead of using gold pieces, we kind of saw it as like gilded wooden pieces with gold leaf, and then the combination of the darker areas that have the sports texture, and then you're seeing other patterns in there that relate, that could be traditional, but also could be more modern and more futuristic. So this became the basis for the overall package. This is some of the elements that we created. These are different designs from initial logo design to promo matchups, titling, player graphics, map graphics. It all starts, of course, with the logo. This was early on in the process. One of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this is that we had to work within a lot of guidelines. FIFA gives us a lot of guidelines to work from. So this is their logo on the left. And they had a rule book that was about 100 pages at least, and there's probably four books or something like that. It's a lot of guidelines. So
and there was no fumbling a pixel.
Yeah. So we used their font, which is a font called Dusha that they created, and then we basically pulled the little star motif from their logo and just use it in a very subtle manner in our logo design. And this is leading up to the tournament, so this is all the matches leading up to the tournament, and it was a little bit of a disappointment for the U.S. But because they didn't make it. But this was the road to Russia, and then. From there we developed out the logo system for the on-air graphics, for the studio graphics, and for the whole system. We expanded that symbolic diamond to a literal diamond, so we had a little gem in all of our in all of our in the system of logos and typography. So then we went to work and designed the interstitial system, which are the hard-working elements of any sports graphics package: the player graphics, country, flag graphics, team versus team, text, interstitials. These were all team versionable and created for VizRT. Mostly, right? I mean, yeah, most of them were.
I think the country we did not, though, right? Because we didn't need to version that on the fly. I think that was the only pre-rendered.
Right, yes. And then we got into the map system, which was really the design of a 3D globe that could have countries that could, be highlighted. So it was coming up with a style and a style of movement, a motion theory, in order to kind of allow Fox to work with this model and to tell their story. So this is the map system. And then lastly, at least for this part, is the monitor graphics. So the idea that we created a whole monitor graphics system that was on set, and they had to be a little bit larger, just for readability, legibility, and this just represents, what I've just kind of covered represents just a portion of what we worked on. We've worked on everything from location strategy. We partnered up with Fox Sports on that, to the on-air system, to even the environmental graphics that were in the IBC, the International Broadcasting Center. So that is basically the overview on the on-air, and then we're going to play a little reel here, and then after that, Marco is going to talk about some of the set design, the AR design, and the VR design.
In Moscow, here comes modern Russia's biggest game ever. It is Russia's party, and the party goes on!
Messi brings it down, in the box, Messi, goal!
Germany are going home from this World Cup.
Cavani, brilliant! It's Mbappe! Oh my word! France are the champions of the world!
So Fox started their World Cup initiative in 2015 with the Women's World Cup, and they had a really good partner when they were in Vancouver, a city partner, and they were able, with their set, to build this gigantic two-story set that had a upper area that had a seating, a desk, a lower area that had all sorts of couches that was used for kind of their interview area, and they were able to have a large area out in the front that was their where they had all of their AR graphics.
The demo
yeah,
field?
the demo field. And essentially, they wanted to duplicate that when they were in Russia. And so Russia, we went into a process where this was probably 3 years before, where we were trying to get this approved through the government agencies that were over there. And so we created several books that they went into the government with, and we had to do things like create the set, go through. At this point, we had the idea that we wanted to be in Red Square. And so we'd have a demo field that was there. We had a large set that was going to be built there, and we would go through that. We went through the process with the government where we were trying to get that approved. And ran into issues with it. They had concerns with sightlines. First of all, getting into Red Square is just problematic. There are issues with sightlines with the Kremlin, potentially if you had a second-story set there, whether or not you could see inside different things. And ultimately, they weren't able to get through that process. And there was a IBC area that was behind St. Basil's that ultimately is where we ended up being. That was the area. There were probably 8 broadcasters, I think, that were back there, along with Fox. And we were basically put into kind of a much smaller area than what they had hoped to be in. So one of the first concerns that we had with that was because we were placed behind St. Basil's and we were outside of Red Square, we're going to be sightlines. We were placed in a parking lot that was behind there. St. Basil's had this gigantic wall in the back. There was kind of a sloping thing that led to it. We were concerned that the set was going to look out on just this wall. And so we very quickly kind of went into 3D and tried to get as accurate a model as possible and work through those sight lines. And we came, ultimately we ended up having some fairly good sight lines. Our wide shots were working fairly well. Our close-up shots, our kind of right shot ended up seeing a little bit more of the wall that we had hoped to get, but ultimately wasn't too bad. And we've kind of moved forward with that. The other thing that we had to deal with was the actual size. Certainly in Vancouver with the Women's World Cup, because we had that dual level set, we have a lot of stuff that a lot of space that we could work with. This had to function in 2 different components. One of them was to be sort of your standard desk scenario with a 5-person desk. The next was to function as an interview show. And so we worked through some of that. You also, in the interview show, had the DJ booth. So we had very quick turnarounds that had to happen here. We had a back of house that was very small. Couldn't end up having a lot of time in between shows. And so everything was really tight. We started threading in everything that one of the benefits of working on set design is that we can kind of, and one of the things that we tried to do on this project was to bring forward as much of the design that we were having on air and thread that through the rest of the process. And the set was a big component of that. So in the upper left here, we had things like the pyramid wall that we created that was this gold leaf sort of multifaceted wall that ended up kind of making its way back into the on-air package as well. We kind of liked kind of what was happening here so much. We had other components that we created, certainly down to the pillows, the textures that are on the carpets, the elements that are in the lower right corner that are hanging on the wall in the back are all CNC'd elements. They were about 4 foot round that we created kind of all of that. We had this backlit cubby wall that was in the lower right that we developed things for, and all of those details served to kind of expand the brand and the scope that we were doing here. It was fun working on certain things that were on the set. We have everything from in those cubbies, the backlit panel cubbies. We had glass plates that had kind of the gold patterns that were on there. We certainly designed all of that. That ended up being kind of slump glass patterns. We had tiles that were 3D printed that were in there. We had fluted glass kind of vases. We had things that were on the little art pieces that were on the table. So we had a lot of fun kind of designing all of that stuff and getting it built. One of the other things that we ran into a problem with was because we were in such a limited space, we had limited height as well. And we wanted to bring in some of the grand feeling that we had with the Women's World Cup set. And it just wasn't kind of working with the height of the grid that was here. We certainly had a nice large open window that was behind the talent, but we didn't really have the height that we desired. So we turned to AR for that, and came up with several solutions. Ultimately, ended up with something that expanded the ceiling to a second level. We viewed this as something that obviously opened up the set environment and made it grander, but also gave us the ability to play some function. So we were able to kind of do some business up there in terms of the graphics and presentation and stuff like that. We, in this particular instance, did not go with a live sky in the background. We decided that we weren't going to see in the camera angles that we had, we weren't going to see the top of St. Basil's. We were really just going to be seeing sky. So a lot of Fox Sports worked on a lot of different kind of environmental variations. You could dial in kind of time of day on it. You could dial in the color of the sky. You could color pick the color of the sky if you wanted to match the color that was down below. Various different clouds that could be put in there so that everything kind of worked as seamlessly as possible. One of the big problems that we had there was this was in a public space. It's right behind Red Square, and there were restrictions on what could be seen from that public space. And so there couldn't be any sponsorship or branding that could be seen from that area. So of course we want to have Fox branding that's in there. We can add that to certain things like the front of the desk where you're not going to see that from the outside, but you have sponsorship opportunities that you obviously want to get into the broadcast, and we turn to AR to be able to do that. So we in Vancouver, we were able to use the large field that was out in front with the gigantic crane moves and stuff to be able to have our AR experience. Here we didn't have the opportunity to be outside. We had to do everything within the confines of the set, which again was very small. So we had very tight restrictions here on space. Again, trying to be do things with the AR graphics that make sense, that certainly take things to kind of the next level. And, we always try with our AR graphics to kind of obviously make it look like it's within the environment and stuff. In instances like this, pulling down kind of our multifaceted wall kind of into some of the components that are happening on the floor, being able to use the monitor that was on the set in conjunction with the AR that's happening on the rest of the on-air stuff, and that was a lot of the AR stuff that we had done when we were working with the set originally. And trying to get into the Red Square area, one of the things that we were doing was working in Unreal. We were using that for a couple of different reasons. One of them was to try and figure out how the sight lines were going to work within it. It was a really easy platform to get in there and kind of move around in. And when that ultimately didn't end up happening, we had this great model that we had started and Fox had taken and really made shine, that we really wanted to be able to use in other ways. And so we ultimately ended up using that in a lot of our traditional formats. So it allowed us to get some of the spirit of the Red Square environment and the environment that the set was in that we maybe weren't able to experience in the parking lot in the back that we were in. And so we allowed, this allowed us to do these big kind of epic drone type moves on something that is familiar and lines up with the area that we were in. This had the ability to change to time of day, so it could go from morning to dusk, evening. The gum building that's on the left-hand side, Fox spent a lot of time working on kind of making that light up and making it look like it was nighttime. And so that allowed us to kind of do some of the hardworking elements of the package in this environment that for all intents and purposes is a real-time environment. We ended up kind of rendering out camera moves from this. Fox was working on rendering out camera moves, and then that was brought into Viz, and some of these foreground elements were actually applied in the Viz engine. So that shows a lot of the set, some of the AR stuff that we had done, and then expansion into the Unreal side of things. And we have a little movie that quickly shows that component.
So hopefully that gives you a nice overview of how we went from a creative brief to designing by objectives, creating the on-air look, the on-air concept or studio concept, and expanding that into the set design, into the AR design, using some of the technology afforded to us with the Unreal system, the models that were created, and kind of hopefully you can see how that brand thread was created throughout the 30 plus days of programming, 64 teams, a lot of elements, hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands or somewhere around 1,000. So just to wrap up, I mean, in addition to the studio system that we created, we also created a promo system that we simplified our concept. And made a very, After Effects only graphic solution to be very easy for the promo producers to work with. We also worked on environmental applications, so taking the concept and applying it to like the countdown in the lobby in Culver City, countdown to the World Cup, player posters. That we're seeing in a lot of different places, and then different graphic walls at the International Broadcasting Center. And then, the thing that was really rewarding, and we really have to take our hats off to Fox Sports on this, is that they really took the package and they really implemented it with their digital application. So you really saw the same system on air in environmental applications on the set, and then also on the app, right? And that was just very rewarding to kind of see that thread throughout the whole month of programming. This kind of just represents all of that last section. And just to sum up, I mean, it was August 2015 to June 2018. That's how much that's 34 months. That's the time frame that we worked on this. Everything from the overall strategic direction for the set location to the environmental design and the on-air system in the middle there. And hopefully you can see the example of a cohesive brand across all those platforms for 30 days and showcasing the world's largest sporting event. So I know everyone wants to get out there now, but we're certainly open to questions. Maybe, Jason?
Yeah, if there's one, quick one. Sure, Paul.
Do you think it will take you for 22?
Mike?
We got to get through 19 Women's World Cup.
Women's, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Similar approach for women's. Like, at Fox Sports, when we do big events, the creative service department are responsible for all parts of the presentation: sets, desks, any outdoor signage, all that stuff. So Paris, somewhat similar problems. Like we're in an area where we want to see the Eiffel Tower, in an area where we can't necessarily put heavy equipment on, so having to juggle a bunch of different things, mock-ups with Unreal. We're building almost all of Paris City in Unreal to do similar things with interstitials, so you kind of feel like you're really in the city without having to haul, jibs or steady cams or any of that stuff around the city.
That's pretty interesting because it's not using it's not a live, real-time graphic, but it's utilizing the technology to create something that you wouldn't be able to do. You wouldn't be able to take a drone and fly it through, around the Eiffel Tower, but we can, and we can play with different ideas of showcasing like a lineup or a lineup system, or kind of promoting or getting sponsorship graphics in there. So there's a really interesting way to play as a director, to play in Paris, So it's really interesting. So.
Cool, guys. Well, I want to thank Nick, Marco, Mike. You guys spent a long time on this, and you could have talked about it for hours, so thank you so much for putting it into 20 minutes.